Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice 10-game NBA slate for you. Lots of injuries on this one. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? We have a couple really high-scoring games in this slate and a whole bunch of cheap, low-scoring games. So that is going to definitely play a factor in this slate. Um, I will kind of go game to game here to start, and then kind of give you information, and then I'll give you my top plays overall. Hopefully, we can find some value as the day progresses. We get more news on injuries as well. So we're going to start with this Washington Cleveland game. Now, this game has actually a pretty good total considering the fact that Cleveland's playing at 239 fantasy points, or total points, excuse me, and a 9.5 point spread for Cleveland. This is definitely going to give us some utility here with the Wizards. Gallinari is questionable, and for the Cavs, Mobley and Garland remains out. This is where Donovan Mitchell comes into play. He is a great play on the slate. He has a lot of potential in this matchup, and his price is just too cheap for what he's been doing. With the guys out for Cleveland, he gets more of a boost, and this is literally the best matchup you could ever want for him. So he's a great option on the slate. Uh, as for the rest of the players on these two teams, Jarrett Allen also has a lot of utility today. He's played pretty well lately, especially with with Mobley out, and I look for him to continue that. He's had 3 games in the last 4 over 50 fantasy points, and this matchup is definitely favorable to him as they're one of the worst teams against centers. I look for him to have an absolutely monster game. There's not a whole lot to like from Washington. I don't like using players against Cleveland very often, and today does not change that as the matchup is a nightmare for that kind of situation. Then we're going to look at Milwaukee and Indiana. Now, Milwaukee and Indiana have the highest total on the slate by over 10 points at 257.5 total. Milwaukee's favored to win the game by 3.5 points, and if we look at the last 3 games that they played against each other, which happened within the last month, all 3 of them were pretty extremely high-scoring games, and so this is going to draw a lot of potential for our fantasy perspective. However, a lot of players are a little bit pricey today, so do keep that in mind from this game, as they should be basically. So obviously Giannis is in play as he is extremely expensive, but he has been absolutely dominating throughout the season. And in the last game against Indiana, he scored 77 fantasy points. He's actually averaged 75 fantasy points a game in the 4 games they played this season. So I look for him to continue that. Then we're going to look at Halliburton, who is very similar to Giannis and his how dominating he's been. He's averaged 54 fantasy points a game against them this season. However, the one game was the second to last game. It was a little bit weaker, where he only scored 37 fantasy points, but that's because Indiana got a little behind early and he didn't really get the peripheral points that he normally gets in assists and rebounds and stuff. So I look for him to bounce back and have a giant game here. The last game he did score nearly 60 fantasy points, and he's priced fairly fairly here. Keep in mind at his price point, you could also get Shea Alexander or Trae Young, which are also viable options at that price range. Um, Looking at the rest of these 2 teams, nobody jumps off the page as must plays, but obviously, depending on who their Pacers start, they would have some utility in this Nesmith and Mathurian and Smith. But they definitely carry some risk until we get the lineup situation. Also, with Middleton and Brown both being questionable and Nimhard being questionable, that definitely gives us some reservation here. For the Bucks, Crowder does remain out though, so that there's not the super defensive risk from this perspective. So I look for both these teams to have a lot of usage and potential on the slate. Looking at Oklahoma City and Atlanta, this game features a pretty high total as well at 248 points. With the Hawks, Hunter is out, and that is going to display it very well for Jalen Johnson for the Hawks, as he's played extremely well since he's been back from his injuries. He played well but prior to the injuries too. His price is just too cheap for his potential here. This matchup should be high scoring, and he's been very good in the last 2 games where he got full complement of minutes. I look for him to get another double-double and to get in the 40 fantasy point range. He is about as core play as you can get at this point. As for other options from this game, Shea Alexander and Trae Young both carry a lot of utility here. They both have high ceilings and high floors. One thing I'll mention is that because they're priced virtually the same as Tyrese Halliburton, you could basically make 3 lineups and then just put one of these 3 in those spots for your third spot. So that's definitely a possibility. I think that I'm going to try to do that today. So obviously we'll have to wait and see how about some other value opens up since they are fairly expensive. But that is definitely a way you can run this slate, as they are all priced very fairly considering the fact that they're over 10K. As for other players from this game, there's a couple guys that have some utility like Bay and Giddy and stuff. However, they do carry some risk, and so do keep that in mind here. Also Bogdanovich for Atlanta. Looking at Toronto and Memphis, this game does feature a pretty low total at 230, which is low for the slate, considering we have all these expensive ones. For the Grizzlies, Gilliard is out, so do keep that in mind. But as for the rest of the players on these teams, I'm a little concerned about Scotty Barnes and Siakam now with Barrett and Quickly being there, as Quickly is going to take some usage, and it looks like Barrett will too. And Barrett and Quickly are both priced up as a result of their first game as well, so don't think there's a lot to like from this game, and this should be a slower game. I know that Memphis does tend to play pretty fast sometimes, and Morant's playing well, but he's also kind of a boomer bust play, so he's not worth the risk today, I don't think. But Siakam and Barnes have played very well lately, and Siakam played well in the last game, but I still worry about Quickly's usage and somewhat of some inconsistencies with Barrett. So I expect Toronto to play well in this game, but I do think it could be a back and forth game throughout. Looking at the Pelicans and Minnesota, this game features a 220-point total, which is one of the lowest on the slate. But this is where we could get some questionable tags, as Zion and Murphy are both questionable. Now, it doesn't show Zion here on the Pelicans for some reason, but it does show Murphy. According to the latest injury report, Zion is questionable today, so hopefully we get some news as the day goes on about that. But we'll have to wait and see. With that said, most of the Pelicans have been priced up as a result of how they played the last few games. I do expect if Zion were to miss, that would open up some value. And if Murphy misses, that would also open up some value. But there's definitely some risk in this game as it being pretty low scoring. And the Pelicans are not favored to win by any stretch. And Minnesota is favored by 7 points. Everybody seems a little bit pricey here, though the Pelicans are the Timberwolves are a little bit underpriced. However, they're just kind of not in a great position there. Looking at Brooklyn and Houston, this game also features a low total of 222, and Houston's favored to win the game by 6 points. So the Nets, Simmons, Walker are both out, and for the Rockets, Eason and Brooks are out. I couldn't find too much that I liked in this game either. Just seemed like everybody's a little bit pricey. Sengun is definitely in play, but he definitely carries some risk at his price. And he's probably not worth it today, to be honest. But there's definitely some potential with him. But with that said, everybody else is pretty much avoidable. Looking at Portland and Dallas, this game does feature a pretty good total at 236 points. But the Trailblazers have a ton of questionable tags in Reith, Kamara, Brown, and Simmons. And then they have Ayton and Williams out. And for the Mavs, Exum is doubtful. Again, uh, depending on how those guys get ruled out and stuff, that could open up some value. But at this point, it's a pretty avoidable situation. Though it does have a decent total. Dallas has been inconsistent. Outside of Doncic, it's really hard to like anybody on their team right now. Um, then we'll look at Chicago and the New York Knicks. This game does feature some interesting potentials here. We have the New York Knicks are playing a team that has really played terrible. For the Bulls, White is questionable. Vucevic, Levine, and Pat Williams are out, and so is Craig. For the Knicks, Robinson is out. With all the questionable and out tags for this game, I do think the Knicks are going to dominate this one. The Bulls have been playing absolutely terrible basketball, and as much as I'd like to look at DeRozan and Drummond as options, I can't really trust them right now the way they're playing as a team. And sometimes the Knicks can be decent defensively, though this game does have a low total at 220 points. Julius Randle looks like a great play. He's a little bit pricier than he has been, but I'm still shocked that his price is this cheap. He's been over 20 real points, right? That said, over the last 18 games. And as long as he's below 9K, he's worth a look. Obviously, the risk of blowout is here, but I think that the Knicks will be able to play well in this one and play with a good fantasy potential. Isaiah Hartenstein also has some utility, as does OG Anunoby. And OG played pretty well on his debut for the Knicks, so I look for him to continue that. Most everybody else is relatively avoidable here. Now, then we're going to look at the Detroit-Utah game. Now, Detroit and Utah have some potential in this one, as this should have a decent total at 240 total points. But Utah's favored to win the game by 9. For the Pistons, Stewart is out. Now, the question here is that can Detroit keep it close enough to make it worthwhile here. I'm not sure if they'll be able to, but it is an interesting matchup for both of these teams, and so they definitely have some utility here. For Utah, I do like some guys, but they're not great options. You know, like Walker Kessler and and Clarkson, excuse me, and Bogdanovich all have some utility here. And even Marketing a little bit. As for Durin, he looks like the best option on the slate for this team, and he has played very well lately, despite the fact that they've been losing virtually every game. As long as Stewart's been out, he's been playing pretty solid, so he's definitely worth a look. But this game definitely carries some risk. But it does have that high total, which is definitely utility here. Looking at the Clippers and Phoenix game, this game definitely does not feature much that I want to like. But Durant is is out today, excuse me, so that is going to play in here. There's possibility that we can find some value with Phoenix, but they are playing a pretty defensive-heavy team, with the Clippers having Harden, Leonard, and Paul George, and Russell Westbrook all on their team. Not only that, but Nurkic has played well, but he's a little bit pricey today, and Beal's prices popped up as well. So it's a pretty avoidable game, and it doesn't have a super high total considering the matchups. So overall, it's probably a pretty avoidable slate. Overall, this slate is interesting, but it definitely carries some risk. I do have some value plays with some upside in Walker Kessler, Bismack Biyombo, OG Anobi, Isaiah Hartenstein, Josh Giddey, and Sam Merrill. They all have some utility today, but they do carry risk. Overall, though, I did like the slate. I think it should be a high-scoring one and should be a fun one. So thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. And have a nice day, guys.